See that lone pine up on that hill over there? What are we actually doing right now? The kids are just wild out there. They're wild. But they're having a good time, you know? They're having a good time. This is Untamed Unbroken, the Adventurer's Guide, and I'm your host, Blake Bredesen. Welcome to Untamed Unbroken, the Adventurer's Guide. I'm Blake, and today we are exploring the intricacies of lake ecology. I know that might sound a little bit boring. I'm a nerd at times, and I find it a little bit fascinating. And this will be a benefit to the fishermen out there to understand this lake ecology and how that can benefit them when you're out fishing. But first, let's get into a brief introduction on lake ecology. There's 4 zones to understand when we're talking about lakes. There is, number 1, the littoral zone. So this is a shallow area near the shore. Sunlight penetrates to the bottom, allows plants to grow, hotspot for biodiversity, home to various plants, insects, amphibians, fish. And this zone is crucial for the life cycles of many species and provides breeding grounds and shelter. That's the littoral zone. Number 2 is the limnetic zone. This is open water area where sunlight supports photosynthetic algae and plankton, which forms the base of the food web. And this zone is vital for primary production, which fuels the entire lake ecosystem. Number 3, you have the profundal zone, the deep dark waters where sunlight does not reach. Life here relies on organic matter falling from above. And this zone is often low in oxygen and supports organisms adapted to these conditions. Number 4, you have the benthic zone. This is the bottom of the lake. It's inhabited by organisms that can tolerate the low oxygen levels, such as certain types of worms and bacteria. And this zone plays a key role in nutrient cycling and decomposition. All right, so there you go. You have 4 zones. Lakes are incredibly diverse. To understand ecology, everything has a role to play. For example, phytoplankton and algae are primary producers, converting sunlight into energy through photosynthesis, and zooplankton feed on these primary producers, and in turn, the zooplankton are eaten by small fish and other aquatic organisms, and it goes up the chain, right? Birds eat small fish, people eat small fish, bigger fish eat smaller fish, people eat it all. So fish are a vital part of the lake ecosystem. Species like bass, trout, perch, walleye, not only important for the food web, but also important for recreational fishing. Big thing that I want people to understand is the thermocline and seasonal turnover when it comes to lakes. So this is one of the more fascinating aspects of lake ecology to me as an outdoorsman is the thermocline and lake turnover. So the thermocline is a distinct layer in a lake where the temperature changes rapidly with depth. It separates the warmer, less dense water of the epilimnion layer from the colder, dense water of the hypolimnion layer. So during the summer, lakes often stratify into these layers, right? The warm layer on top, the cooler layer on the bottom, and the thermocline in between. And typically in the summer, you want to fish below the thermocline. In the fall, as those temps drop, the surface water cools, it becomes more dense, and this is going to cause that water to mix. It's a process known as turnover, and the turnover helps distribute oxygen and nutrients throughout the lake, which is crucial in maintaining a healthy ecosystem, but also for fishermen, it makes it easier to fish because now these oxygen levels are stable. The fish are everywhere in the lake instead of just below the thermocline, and it may make for a funner time out there hunting. But now that you have a little bit of the basics on lake ecology, let's answer some questions about this. So how does the thermocline affect fishing And how can I use it to my advantage? So, like I said, the thermocline is that layer in the lake where the temperature changes rapidly with depth. So during the summer, the lakes stratify into the three layers: the warm epilimnion on top, the cooler hypolimnion at the bottom, and the thermocline in between. And fish are often going to stay below that thermocline where the water is cooler and the oxygen levels are stable. So to use that thermocline to your advantage, you can use a fish finder. Fish finder is going to help you locate that thermocline. It will often appear as a distinct line on the screen. And so you want to target depths below that. So fish like bass, trout, they're often going to be below that thermocline on those hot summer days. You can adjust your bait and your lures. So using lures and bait and setups that you're going to reach those depths. That's the only way you're really going to do it. So sinking the lures, weighted rigs, Lindy rigs with weight, with a good weight on them, trolling, finding those pockets. But you just want to make sure depth-wise, you're below that thermocline, you're in those cooler waters. Another question: what are the signs that lake turnover is happening, and how does that affect fishing? So lake turnover occurs in the fall and spring when water temperature becomes uniform from top to bottom, and it causes water to mix. So the signs of turnover include murky water. So the mixing of sediments and nutrients can make that water appear cloudy. Floating debris is another one. Increased debris on top of the water on the surface is a common sign. And then uniform water temperature. So if you use a thermometer and you measure the water temperature at different depths, it's going to be a pretty uniform temperature across the board. So during turnover, fish are becoming more active and they spread throughout the lake, which makes them easier to catch because they're all over the place. Here's another good question. Another three here. How does weather affect fishing? And what should I consider when planning a fishing trip? So weather can significantly impact fish behavior and feeding patterns. This isn't true all the time, but here are some considerations to make. Temperature. Fish are cold-blooded, and their activity levels are influenced by that water temperature. So warmer temperatures can increase fish activity, while colder temperatures can slow them down. Generalization. Barometric pressure. Fish are sensitive to changes in the barometric pressure. A falling barometer often can signal good fishing conditions as fish become more active before a storm. Wind. Wind can stir up the water, can bring food to the surface and attract fish. So fishing on the windward side of a lake can be productive. Also, it's why having a nice little walleye chop is a thing. Cloud cover. Overcast days can be excellent for fishing. Those fish are more likely to venture out from cover to feed because that sun and the sun's rays aren't just shining right through to them, shining a light on them. All right. Here's another question. This has turned into, I guess, more so about fishing and just a tiny, tiny bit about lake ecology. But what are some effective techniques for catching bass in different seasons? Spring, summer, fall, winter. And yes, their behavior does change with the season. And so you do have to adjust your techniques accordingly. In the springtime, bass are spawning, as many fish are. And they can be found in those shallow waters that use soft plastic spinner baits, jigs near spawning beds. That springtime, you can hit some top water with them if that surface temperature is just right. Summer, the bass move deeper into cooler waters, and you can target them with deep diving crankbaits, drop shots. A lot of times when we're out walleye fishing, we'll also catch bass this same exact way with just like a jig and a minnow, or a jig and a worm, or a jig and a leech or something. In the fall, Bass are feeding heavily to prepare for winter, so using crankbaits, top water, swim baits near bait fish schools. They're going to be not as deep anymore again. And with that, like I said, with that turnover, all fish, including bass, are going to scatter and they'll be at all sorts of depths. Winter, bass are less active. They stay in deeper waters. Just slow down. You're not jigging super aggressively. You're slowing down your presentation with everything. Blade baits, soft plastics, jigs. Move slower in the wind. And number 5, last question. How can I improve my catch and release techniques to ensure fish survival? Well, number 1, you could use barbless hooks. 1, it does make them easier to remove. 2, you don't have to worry as much about getting hooked yourself, but they do cause less injury to fish. So if you use barbless hooks, that's going to help with that. Handling fish gently. You don't keep them out of the air for very long. Use proper tools. If you have a hook that's deeply embedded, it's likely better to cut the line and leave the hook in place. So you rip it out to dead fish. And if they're slow to swim away, you can hold the fish in the water facing into the current until it swims away on its own. Or if there's obviously no current, you can kind of push and pull that fish. So you're holding it on the tail. It's in the water and you're just kind of moving it slowly back and forth to help pass water over those gills and open those gills up so that it can get that oxygen it needs. That does it for today. I hope you enjoyed the little shallow dive into lake ecology and a little bit into how that can help you when you are out fishing. Enjoy yourself and stay wild. Thank you for sticking around. If you've enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a rating and review. Even one word, it helps a ton. Sincerely appreciate you guys. Thank you all, and we'll see you on the next one. Stay wild.
You've been listening to Untamed, Unbroken, a Lone Pine Adventures original podcast.